The Bride in Chains. The air on the alien outpost was heavy with dust and silence, broken only by the humming of old generators that kept the barracks alive. Sergeant Marcus Hale had fought for 3 years across worlds no one on Earth had ever heard of, and now he found himself stationed on this forgotten place where human troops were considered little more than guards, watching over surrendered enemies. He had expected boredom and a long wait for reassignment. But what he was given that morning was something else entirely. The commander of the outpost called him into the hall where alien banners still hung from broken pillars. There the local overseers presented a gift to him for surviving the campaign. They dragged her forward, a tall alien woman shackled with iron bands around her wrists and ankles. Her skin shimmered faintly in the pale light, a deep shade of violet marked with faint silver lines. Her eyes glowed with defiance even as she stumbled before him. Her chains rattled against the floor as if mocking the idea of honor. The overseer sneered and said, "This is yours now, soldier." A prize of victory? Marcus stood frozen, staring at the woman who stared back at him with such intensity that he felt like he was the one in chains. He had seen prisoners before, but never like this. She was not broken. She was not pleading, she was waiting. The soldiers around him laughed. Some clapped his shoulder, congratulating him, but he did not feel pride, only unease. Something about her carried weight, a presence that told him she was no simple captive. When they left him alone with her in the holding chamber, he approached slowly. Her breathing was steady. Her chin lifted in defiance. He could almost hear her daring him to treat her like an object. He did not raise his hand. Instead, he crouched down and said in a low voice, "I don't want you like this." The alien narrowed her eyes. Her voice was rough when she spoke. "You cannot free me, human. If you do, you invite death upon yourself." Marcus hesitated, then reached for the key left on the table. He felt the cold metal in his palm, the weight of a choice he knew was not meant for him. He looked at her once more, and without another word, he unlocked the first shackle. The band clattered to the floor. She stiffened, watching him closely as if waiting for betrayal. But he moved to the next shackle and then the next until the heavy chains lay on the ground between them. The alien woman rubbed her wrists, her voice now trembling, not with fear but with anger. "Do you understand what you have done?" Human Marcus shook his head. "Only that no one deserves to live in chains." Her eyes flashed with something unreadable and she stepped closer, towering over him. Her voice lowered to a whisper. "They will come for you now, my hunters. They will not forgive this act. You have broken a law older than your species' existence." The warning sank into him like a knife. But Marcus did not flinch. He stood tall, meeting her gaze. "I have been hunted before. I will not regret this." She searched his face for weakness but found only resolve. Something shifted in her. Then not trust, not yet, but recognition. The faintest trace of respect touched her expression. The alarms outside wailed, breaking the stillness. Soldiers shouted as patrols reported movement beyond the perimeter. Marcus turned toward the sound, but the alien woman grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "They are already near," she said. Her words were not a threat. They were a certainty. For the first time, Marcus felt the weight of his choice press down on him. He had freed her. He had defied custom. He had invited the wrath of hunters he did not yet understand. And yet, as he looked into her fierce, glowing eyes, he felt that this moment would shape not only his fate but something far greater. The war he thought was over had only just begun. The warning echoes. The alarms soon faded into the background, but Marcus could still feel the tension rising like a storm over the outpost. The alien woman who had stood chained before him only minutes earlier now walked freely, her movements still carrying the stiffness of long captivity. Yet her eyes never lost their sharp watchfulness. She looked at the walls as if they would not protect anyone from what was coming. Marcus followed her gaze and for the first time realized that this dusty garrison might not withstand the kind of danger she spoke about. She told him her name was Solara. Her voice carried a weight of command, though. It cracked from thirst and exhaustion. She refused water at first, wary that it might be another trick. But when Marcus insisted, she drank and finally sat by the corner of the room, Her presence filled the silence. He wanted answers, but she spoke. First, her people, she explained, did not forgive dishonor. Chains were the deepest shame a warrior could suffer, and her capture had already marked her as unworthy. But her release was worse. To free her was to challenge the ancient vows of her clan, and for that hunters would be dispatched to wipe out the one responsible. Marcus tried to process her words. Hunters meant soldiers, assassins maybe even worse. He had heard stories from other units about alien trackers who could move unseen across whole planets. Stories whispered in mess halls dismissed as myths. Yet Solara's voice carried no trace of exaggeration. He asked why she had been chosen to be chained in the first place, and her answer chilled him. She had been a daughter of a high, line groomed to lead warriors. She had fallen in battle captured by humans during the siege of her world and then traded as a prize. Her people would rather she had died than suffer that fate. To them, her honor had already been stripped. But the moment he freed her, he had turned her dishonor into defiance, and now both of them bore the mark of hunted prey. The outpost commander did not take her warning seriously. When Marcus tried to report strange readings on the outer scanners, the commander waved it off, saying rebels often tried to scare troops with false signals. But Marcus had seen the way Solara tensed whenever the reports came in. He had fought long enough to know when an enemy shadowed him, and these shadows were real. That night, Marcus walked the perimeter restless. The stars above the alien sky burned bright and cold. Solara joined him unbidden, her steps silent. She told him that the hunters would not attack at once. They would watch first. They would test his strength too. See if he was worthy of being hunted, and if he was, they would come in full fury. She said this with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow, as if part of her wanted the hunters to find him and another part feared what that would mean. He asked her why she warned him at all. If her people despised her chains, why care for a human who freed her? She stood there a long time before answering. Because you broke their law with courage, not with cruelty. And because you did not look at me as property, but as someone who still had a voice, that alone has meaning. Her words struck him more deeply than he expected. He had been raised among soldiers, taught that war was duty and survival was victory. But this was something else entirely. Over the next days, the atmosphere in the outpost thickened. Equipment failed at odd hours. Patrols reported strange tracks that vanished in the sand. Men laughed nervously, pretending it was nothing. Marcus knew. It was the hunters testing their ground. Solara grew, more restless, pacing the barracks like a caged beast, yet she no longer carried the chains. Her presence was a constant reminder of the choice he had made. When the first scout patrol vanished without signal, even the commander could not ignore it. Anymore, Marcus looked at Solara and saw the confirmation in her eyes. The hunters had arrived. The warning she had spoken in the quiet chamber now echoed in every corner of the outpost. There would be no escape from what was coming. The only choice left was how to face it. Hunters in the shadows. The silence of the outpost grew heavier with each passing day, as if the very air carried the weight of unseen eyes. Marcus felt it every time he stepped outside the barracks, every time the dust shifted, strangely along the ridges, or when the scanners flickered with signals that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Solara never said much, but the tension in her body told him she felt it too. She would pause in mid-step as if listening to something, far away, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Her people were trackers by blood, and she knew the signs better than anyone. The commander still dismissed it as rebel tricks, but Marcus had stopped trying to argue. He knew what he had seen, and he knew what Solara had warned him about. The missing patrols were not an accident, and the scattered pieces of equipment found days later with no trace of the men who carried them were proof enough that something had already breached their perimeter. The hunters were here, and they were watching. Solara began to speak more openly at night when the barracks slept. She told Marcus about the hunters not as soldiers but as living instruments of judgment. Each clan raised them from birth, not to fight wars, but to reclaim honor. To them, hunting was a sacred act. It was not just about killing, but about restoring balance. She said they would mark their prey with fear, first leaving signs that the prey could sense but never see until the moment of confrontation. When Marcus asked her how long they would wait, she simply said, "Until they decide you are worth killing." Despite the grimness of her words, Marcus found himself listening with a strange fascination. She was no longer only a captive or even a freed prisoner. She had become a guide into a world of traditions so old and alien that they felt carved into the stars themselves. And though he tried to resist the thought, he knew she was right about one thing. The hunters were not testing the outpost. They were testing him on the fourth night. The power grid failed without warning, plunging the entire base into darkness. Panic rippled through the soldiers as they scrambled for lamps and backup generators. Marcus felt the shift instantly, and so did Solara. She whispered that the hunters were close. They would not strike yet, but they wanted him to know they had entered the walls. He moved through the corridors, rifle in hand, scanning every shadow. He thought he saw movement more than once, but each time it dissolved into emptiness. Still, the unease never left his chest. The next morning they found symbols carved into the outer gates, strange marks that glowed faintly as if burned into the metal. The men recoiled, in fear, whispering curses, but Solara touched the marks with reverence. Her voice was steady as she explained, "They have named you Marcus. They have declared you prey. This hunt is no longer a threat. It has already begun." The soldiers demanded answers from him. Some accused him of bringing this curse upon them. Others whispered about the alien woman and how her presence had doomed the outpost. Marcus ignored them all and instead sought Solara's counsel. She told him bluntly that he had two choices. He could abandon the outpost and try to escape into the wilderness where survival was slim, or he could stand and face the hunters head-on. She studied him carefully, and for the first time her voice softened. "I have seen many humans in battle, but you are different. You freed me when you had no reason. I must know if that courage will carry you into the fire." Marcus did not answer right away. He walked to the armory, checked his rifle, cleaned the sand from its barrel, and tightened the straps of his gear. He had been a soldier long enough to know that running only delayed the inevitable. He turned to Solara and said, "I do not run from shadows. If they want me, let them come." Her eyes lingered on him as if searching for something. Then she nodded, a slow gesture of respect. For the first time, he thought he saw trust glimmer in her gaze. That night, the first attack came, small, fast shapes darting through the dark, striking from angles the soldiers could not predict. Men screamed as arrows of searing energy cut through armor. Marcus fought back fiercely. His reflexes sharp, his movements precise. He was not only fighting for his life now, but for something else. For a bond that had begun in chains and was now forged in fire. Solara watched him fight, and something in her hardened face shifted, as if she finally understood why humanity was feared across the stars. He was not prey. He was a hunter himself, and the real test was only just beginning. First blood. The outpost was no longer a place of uneasy waiting, but a battlefield cloaked in shadows. The hunters struck like ghosts, appearing at the edge of vision and vanishing before soldiers could aim their weapons. Marcus had fought in many wars, but never against enemies who moved with such precision. They were not like soldiers seeking ground. They were predators, testing every weakness, probing for the moment when fear would break their prey. The screams of men echoed across the walls as patrols were cut down in the dark, leaving behind nothing but silence and scorched metal. Marcus refused to hide. He moved through the chaos with calm determination, his weapon steady, his eyes sharp. He was not blind to fear, but he did not let it guide him. He fought as he always had, with patience and with the knowledge that hesitation killed faster than bullets. Solara was never far from his side. She moved with a fluid grace born from years of warrior training. Even though she had been in chains for so long, her strikes were quick and merciless, her presence beside him, turning the narrow corridors of the outpost into hunting grounds of their own. The soldiers who once mocked him now looked to Marcus for orders. He found himself leading them, not because he wanted command, but because he refused to let them crumble. He ordered them into defensive lines and taught them how to hold fire until the enemy revealed themselves. Solara added, her voice sharp and commanding. teaching them how to listen for subtle shifts of sound, how to read the dust stirred by unseen feet. Her knowledge and his discipline forged the men into something stronger than frightened prey. The hunters did not retreat, but they adapted. They struck at the supply lines, cutting water storage and power cells, forcing the humans into tighter quarters. Marcus knew this was not the main assault, only the beginning. He had seen enough ambushes to understand when an enemy was softening the ground. The real attack would come when the fear was strongest and the walls were weakest. That night it came without warning. The walls shook as something massive struck the gates. Hunters poured inside their armor, glistening with strange lights, their movements fast and silent. Arrows of burning plasma cut through the air. Marcus bellowed for his men to hold steady, and they obeyed, firing in controlled bursts. The clash turned the outpost into a furnace of light and blood. Marcus fought with ferocity that surprised even Solara. He drove into the attackers with brutal precision, close-quarters combat where his strength and instincts gave him an edge. One hunter lunged at him with a blade of glowing steel, but Marcus caught the strike, twisted, and broke the alien's arm before driving his knife through its chest. Solara fought beside him, unleashing the fury of a warrior long denied her place. She struck with speed and grace, cutting through hunters who underestimated her. Her chains had been broken, but it was in this battle that she truly shed the weight of captivity. For every strike she landed, it was not only survival but defiance. Her eyes burned with fire each time she met Marcus's gaze. And in that fire, he saw the truth. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a partner. The battle stretched into hours. Soldiers fell, but they did not collapse into despair. Marcus and Solara drove them forward, their unity turning the tide. For every hunter that slipped through the shadows, another was dragged into the light and cut down. But Marcus knew they could not win this way. The hunters were too many, too skilled, and they would not stop until he lay dead. His defiance had only marked him more deeply as worthy prey. When dawn broke, the ground outside, the outpost was littered with bodies, both human and alien. The air smelled of smoke and blood. The walls were cracked, the gates shattered, but they were still standing. Marcus leaned against the barricade. His armor scorched his arms, heavy with exhaustion. Solara stood beside him, her face streaked with blood that was not her own. For a moment there was silence, and in that silence he felt something shift between them. It was not spoken, but it was there, an unbreakable bond forged in fire. And blood. Solara turned to him, her voice low, but steady. This was only the first wave. The real hunt will come next. Marcus met her eyes and nodded. He had seen enough wars to know she was right. They had won the night. But the war for survival was only just beginning. The bond forged. The sun rose over the outpost, casting a pale light across the battered walls and broken gates. The surviving soldiers moved like shadows, tending to the wounded, dragging the fallen to makeshift graves. Marcus walked among them, his body aching from wounds and exhaustion, but his mind clear. He had lived through too many battles to mistake a lull for safety. The hunters had withdrawn, but not because they were defeated. They had only pulled back to prepare for the next strike. Solara remained close, her violet skin streaked with dirt and blood. Her eyes followed every movement beyond the horizon, as though she could already see the hunters returning. She no longer spoke with the distance of a prisoner. She gave orders, checked the defenses in the soldiers, listened to her just as they did to Marcus. At first they had resisted the idea of following an alien, but now they looked at her with respect, for she had fought at their side and bled beside them. That kind of loyalty was earned, not given. When the work was done, Marcus and Solara sat together in the quiet ruins of a storage bay. He sharpened his knife on a whetstone while she cleaned the blade she carried from the battlefield. For a while they did not speak. Silence stretched between them, but it was not uneasy. Instead, it was the silence of people who had fought together and no longer needed to fill the air with words. Eventually, Solara broke it with a question. "Why did you not leave me in chains?" "It would have been easier and safer." Marcus kept his eyes on the knife as he answered, "Because I have seen chains before. My people wore them once long ago and we broke them too. No one deserves to live like. Her gaze softened at his words, and for the first time her voice lost its edge. She told him of her youth, of the harsh training she had endured to prepare for command of warriors. She had been raised to believe honor was everything, that her worth was measured only in battle. But captivity had taken that from her, and her people would never see her the same again. Marcus listened without judgment, and when she paused, he told her of his own past, of Earth's long history of wars of soldiers who fought not for glory but for survival, of men and women who had risen from chains to build something stronger together. The bond between them deepened with each word shared and each silence held. They were no longer captor and captive, not even soldier and alien. They were survivors tied together by choice and by the blood they had spilled to protect each other. The soldiers around them began to notice it too. Some whispered that Marcus and Solara moved like two halves of one force. And though neither spoke of it aloud, they both knew the truth in their hearts. The hunters did not wait long. Their signs appeared again on the ridges surrounding the outpost, glowing marks etched into the stone, warning that the next trial would come. Marcus studied the terrain with Solara beside him. She traced the paths with her fingers, showing where the hunters would move, how they would drive them into a trap. He saw the lines clearly once she explained, and together they began to shape a plan when night fell. Marcus led a group of soldiers out into the desert. Solara guided them through winding canyons where the hunters were sure to follow. They laid traps of their own crude devices built from the remains of broken weapons and scavenged supplies. The men doubted it would work, but Marcus reminded them that war was never about perfection. It was about turning what you had into enough to win. Solara smiled at that, for it echoed her own people's teachings. As they waited in the canyon, Marcus and Solara stood side by side, watching the stars burn above them. He felt the tension in his chest lessen for a moment, not because the danger was gone, but because he was no longer facing it alone. Solara turned to him, her voice quiet, but fierce. When this ends, whether in death or survival, know this: you are no longer alone in this hunt. You freed me not just from chains, but from the weight of dishonor. Whatever comes next, I face it with you. Marcus met her eyes, and for the first time since this began, he allowed himself a small smile. He did not speak grand promises. He simply nodded and gripped his weapon tighter. The bond was sealed not in words, but in trust, and in the certainty that they would fight as one. The hunters would come soon, but Marcus no longer saw them as unstoppable predators. They were enemies, and enemies could be beaten. Together with Solara, he would prove that even prey could become the deadliest hunters of all. The trap turns. The desert canyon lay silent beneath. The twin moons, its rocks casting long shadows that seemed to shift with every gust of wind. Marcus crouched among the stones, his rifle steady, his breath calm around him. The soldiers waited, nervous but hardened by the battles they had survived. Solara stood at his side, her eyes scanning the darkness, her every movement controlled and certain. She had warned him the hunters would not come as a wave this time. They would stalk the canyon like wolves, driving their prey into corners and striking where fear was sharpest. But Marcus was no longer waiting to be hunted. He had chosen the ground and prepared it. The traps were crude, but deadly. He and Solara had rigged explosives from broken power cells, hidden them beneath loose rocks, and tied motion triggers to the canyon walls. They had dug pits covered with sand-sharpened steel fragments into makeshift stakes. The hunters believed themselves the masters of pursuit. But Marcus knew war was about patience and surprise. He was ready to show them that humans could turn even scraps into weapons. The first sign came as a whisper of sand shifting high on the cliffs. Solara tensed, but Marcus raised his hand for silence. He counted the beats of his heart. Then the shadow moved again, the figure slipping between the stones, graceful and fast. Another followed, and then another. The hunters had come, their armor glimmering faintly under the moons, their weapons humming with quiet energy. They were beautiful in their precision, terrifying. In their confidence, Marcus almost admired them, but admiration had no place here. The lead hunter descended into the canyon, unaware of the trigger beneath his feet. A sharp click echoed through the night, followed by a roar of fire as the hidden charge exploded. The blast hurled the hunter against the canyon wall, his armor cracked and smoking. The others reacted instantly, moving like blurs through the shadows, but Marcus was already firing. His shot struck one clean through the chest, sending it tumbling into the pit of sharpened steel where its scream was cut short. Chaos erupted, but this time it was not the soldiers who broke. It was the hunters who faltered as the canyon turned against them. Explosions tore through the narrow paths, collapsing. Stone onto their formations, soldiers fired from hidden alcoves, cutting down those who tried to regroup. Solara leapt from the rocks, her blade flashing as she struck with the fury of a warrior reborn. Her cry echoed through the canyon, a sound of defiance that shook even her enemies. Marcus moved with ruthless efficiency. His training guided every step, every shot. He used the traps not just to kill but to control the battlefield, driving the hunters where he wanted them to go, forcing them into crossfire and ambush. They had come to claim him as prey, but now they were the ones bleeding in the dust. Solara fought beside him, her movements flowing with his, as if they had trained together all their lives. When he fired, she struck. When he faltered, she covered him. Their bond was no longer unspoken. It was alive in every motion of the fight. One of the hunters broke through the lines and charged directly at Marcus, its blade raised in a strike meant to end him. Marcus met it head on, slamming his rifle aside and drawing his knife. The two clashed in brutal silence, steel against steel, strength against speed. The hunter snarled as it forced him back, but Marcus did not yield. He remembered every battle, every loss, every lesson, carved into his scars. He twisted under its strike, drove his knife upward, and ended it with a single decisive thrust. By the time the echoes of battle faded, the canyon was littered with broken bodies. Hunters lay scattered among the rocks, their glowing armor dimmed. Soldiers cheered, though exhaustion weighed heavy in their voices. For the first time since the hunt began, victory did not feel impossible. Marcus stood among the wreckage, breathing hard, his body aching, but his spirit unbroken. Solara approached, her face streaked with blood and dust, yet her eyes burning with pride. She looked at him not as human, not as alien, but as equal. "You have turned their hunt against them," she said, her voice low and fierce. "They will not forget this." Marcus met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then let them remember." But even in triumph, Solara's face darkened. She pointed to the horizon where the night sky burned faintly with lights. A ship larger than any they had faced descended from the stars, its engines roaring with the promise of greater fury. The hunters they had fought were only the vanguard. The true force was arriving, and with it came the weight of an entire clan's honor. Marcus felt no fear, only resolve. He tightened the grip on his rifle and turned to his men. "We held this canyon," he said, his voice carrying across the battered soldiers. "We will hold again, and this time we do not stand alone." He looked at Solara, and she nodded her silent vow, binding them together for what was coming. The hunt was far from over, but Marcus was no longer prey. The battlefield had shifted, and for the first time the hunters would learn what it meant to be pursued by humanity. Hunted no more. The dawn came red across the desert sky, and with it, the shadow of the massive warship that loomed above the horizon. Its engines carved trails of fire across the clouds as it descended toward the canyon. The soldiers stood in silence, staring at the colossal vessel that blotted out the stars. There, weapons felt small in their hands, their breaths caught in their throats. Marcus stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the approaching threat. He knew this was no longer a skirmish with hunters. This was the judgment of an entire clan come to reclaim honor with his death. Solara stood beside him, her violet skin glimmering faintly under the rising sun. She did not look at the soldiers. She did not look at the ship. Instead, she looked at Marcus as though she had made her choice long before the ship appeared. She spoke in a voice that carried both pride and sorrow. "They will not stop, Marcus. They have brought the clan's chosen warriors, the ones who fight until either they fall or their prey is broken. But you must know this. I will not allow them to take you alone. I will fight with you until my last breath." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and firm. "You are no longer chained, Solara. he said. "You choose where you stand." She nodded once, her eyes blazing with resolve. "Then I stand." The warship opened its bays, and from the sky descended lines of armored warriors. They landed in the dust with the grace of predators, their blades gleaming with alien fire. They formed ranks silent and unflinching. Their leader stepped forward, a towering figure in armor marked with crimson symbols. Solara stiffened at the sight and whispered, "He is the High Hunter of my clan. To face him is to face death itself." Marcus raised his rifle, but he felt no fear. Instead, he felt a clarity he had only known in the moments before his hardest battles. He turned to his men, their faces pale and weary, and spoke with the voice of command. "We have survived every strike they sent. We have turned the shadows against them. We will not fall here. Not. While we still draw breath, you are soldiers of Earth, and today we show them what it means to hunt a human." The battle began with a roar. The hunters surged forward, their weapons cutting through the dust like lightning. The soldiers fired in unison. Guided by Marcus's orders, their bullets tore into armor. Their grenades burst among the ranks. The canyon that had seen so much death shook again with the fury of war. Marcus fought at the front, his rifle spitting fire until it ran dry. Then his knife taking its place. He moved with relentless precision, his scars and experience driving every motion. Solara fought at his side, her blade dancing with deadly grace. She struck with the fury of a leader reclaiming her place. Her cries echoed across the battlefield, a call that shook even the hunters. Her people had once called her dishonored, but now she fought as a warrior reborn. Beside Marcus, she was not prey. She was not captive. She was free, and her freedom was carved with every strike she made. The High Hunter advanced, cutting through soldiers with brutal speed. His blade burned with energy, each strike leaving trails of fire. Marcus moved to meet him, and Solara followed. Together they clashed with the towering figure. The fight was fierce, steel against steel, strength against skill. Marcus absorbed blow after blow, his body straining but his resolve unbroken. Solara struck where he faltered, her blade weaving into his defense. They moved as one, their bond forged in fire, guiding them. At last Marcus saw his chance. He feinted left, drawing the High Hunter's strike, then twisted forward, slamming his knife into the gap beneath the alien's armor. Solara struck at the same moment, driving her blade through the creature's chest. The High Hunter roared once, a sound of fury and defeat before collapsing into the dust. The hunters who remained faltered, their leader, fallen, their honor shattered. Silence fell over the canyon. The surviving hunters withdrew, dragging their wounded back toward the warship. The soldiers stared in disbelief, their breaths ragged, their weapons shaking. Marcus stood over the fallen High Hunter, his chest heaving. Solara stood beside him, her eyes fierce and unyielding. The warship slowly rose, back into the sky, its engines fading into the distance, leaving the canyon littered with the echoes of battle. The soldiers cheered, their voices breaking the silence. They shouted Marcus's name. They shouted Earth's name. They shouted because they had survived. But Marcus did not raise his voice. Instead, he looked at Solara. She met his gaze, and in that moment, no words were needed. They had fought as equals. They had lived as partners. They had turned the hunt into a victory. Solara spoke at last, her voice steady. "The chains are broken, Marcus. You are no longer hunted, you are remembered." Marcus nodded, his hand still tight on his blade. "Then let them remember us both." The sun climbed higher, casting light over the ruins of the battlefield. Soldiers carried their wounded and buried their dead. Marcus and Solara stood together at the heart of the canyon, not as captor and captive, not even as human and alien, but as warriors bound by choice and by survival. The hunt was over, and in its place, something stronger had been born, the chains of fate broken. The battlefield lay quiet under the burning sky as smoke curled from shattered rocks, and the scent of blood lingered heavy in the air. Marcus stood among the ruins, his armor dented, his body bruised, but his spirit burning stronger than ever. Around him, the surviving soldiers moved slowly, tending to the wounded, carrying the fallen, and gathering what little strength remained. Solara stood close, her blade still stained from the clash, her violet skin streaked with dirt and blood, yet her stance unbowed. She had once been presented to him as a chained prize, but now she stood as his equal, her head held high, her eyes filled with a fire that no clan could break. The silence between them spoke of everything they had endured together. From the moment he turned the key and shattered her chains to the long nights of hunted fear and desperate battles, their paths had been bound by choice, not by command. She had warned him of the hunters, and he had refused to run. Together they had faced shadows that moved like death itself. They had held the canyon with nothing but scraps and willpower, and they had struck down the high hunter whose name once brought terror to whole worlds. Now the hunters had withdrawn their warship, retreating into the stars, carrying defeat with them, and leaving Marcus and Solara standing victorious in the dust. Solara turned to him, her voice steady and strong. "You have broken more than my chains. Marcus, you have broken the path they set for me. You have shown me a new way to stand free, not as prey, not as dishonored captive, but as a warrior who chooses her own fate." Marcus looked at her with the quiet strength of a soldier who had seen too much death to waste words. He only nodded because he knew she spoke the truth, not just for herself but for him as well. He had been hunted by shadows and by his own doubts, but in freeing her, he had freed a part of himself. The soldiers gathered around their leader, their faces still carrying fear but also something else. Pride. They had fought against impossible odds and survived not because of weapons or fortifications, but because they had followed a man who refused to bow and an alien woman who refused to remain broken. They saw in the two of them something larger than survival. They saw the promise that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, chains could be shattered and prey could rise as hunters. Solara raised her blade toward the sky, and her voice rang out across the canyon. "Today we are no longer hunted. Today we are the ones who decide our fate." Marcus lifted his rifle in silence beside her, and the soldiers echoed their cries. The sound rolled across the desert like thunder, carrying a message that would not fade quickly. As the sun climbed higher, the warship was gone. The hunters were scattered, and the canyon became more than a place of death. It became a symbol. Marcus and Solara stood at its center, bound not by chains, not by fear, but by trust and by choice. Their story had begun with chains and warnings of death, yet it ended here with victory carved in fire and blood. Marcus knew the hunters would remember him, and Solara knew her clan would never forget what she had done, but neither feared the memory. Together they had rewritten the chains of fate, and together they would face whatever storms came next. For in the heart of the galaxy a truth had been born. No matter the chains, no matter the hunters, no matter the laws of clans, humanity and those who chose freedom would always rise.